Oh,
I know.
I've seen that book.
I
Oh,
recognize the
wow.
cover. I'm
Oh,
sure I've read.
okay.
How old is that, David? When did you write
Oh,
that?
God.
90s?
Um,
We are live on YouTube and Facebook. We're going to be here with David Nasaw on Greatest Generation Live. We're going to be talking about the wounded generation, but also you may have just seen up on the screen, Andrew Carnegie. You have now, David, before I let everybody in, is it Carnegie or Carnegie?
are you from Pittsburgh?
Yep.
Well, Carnegie, right?
Well, that's
New
right.
York. In New York, we're allowed to say Carnegie. Uh,
Let's get everyone in the room. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Greatest Generation Live for Thursday, November 20th. My name is Sean Hall. I'm Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. I see some familiar faces. Mary Klepper, welcome back. Haven't seen you in a while. It's good to see everyone here. Renee, Pete Sarmiento. I believe I've seen your name before. Welcome back. It's been a while. It's good to see you. Carol Schultz, good to see you. Rick Weber, pleasure as always. Welcome, everyone. We have a great program lined up for you tonight. And for those of you who may be new to us, we are the Veterans Breakfast Club, and our mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. And I want to let everybody know that if you've attempted to access our website, we had a problem with it. It was down for the last couple days, but it is back up and online. So everything should be going smoothly there. So please visit our website if you haven't, www.veteransbreakfastclub.org. You can find out everything there is to know about us, including all of our upcoming online and in-person programs. Check out our free quarterly magazine, which I'll talk about a little bit about later. But before we get into all of that in our station break, we'll welcome our host, Glenn Flickinger. Glenn, how are you doing this evening?
Excellent, Sean. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's good to see everybody. I see Ed Cavo for the first time in a while. Ed, how are you? Well, we'll have to unmute him. I'll unmute him. Just let him say hello. Only because I like to tease him.
Doing well, Glenn. Doing well.
Ed, have you signed up for our Sicily, Italy trip yet?
No, we've talked about it. Not yet.
I'm gonna have,
Why don't you and I have lunch and we can talk?
I think a couple of beers and I'll get you to go. That'll do it. That'll
I
do it.
also want to say Glenn Russell Freeberg is in the room.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Russell. Let's make sure he's unmuted. And Carol Schultz Vento is unmuted as well. I'll get Carol if you would get Russell.
I got Russell. Russell, how are you this evening?
I'm fine, thank you.
Russell, thank you for joining us. Russell responded to my email of a couple of days ago. For those of you who might not know Russell, Russell is a World War II veteran, 102 years young, and we're already planning his birthday party for March of next year. It's going to be a wing dinger, Russell. We're all coming out to your house. You better let your wife know. Is your wife still with you?
Oh,
No?
she died in 1905.
Well, wherever you are, let them know you're going to have 40 or 50 people visiting you. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But it's great to have you on, Russell. And I asked Russell specifically to be on to comment here and there as we get into this about his return to the United States after World War II. I had also asked George Rubin to join. I did not hear back from him, Sean. If you see George Rubin join, would you let me know, please?
Will do.
Okay. And very kindly, Carol Schultz Vento is on. Hello, Carol. How are you doing?
Glenn, I'm fine. How are you?
Okay. If you recall, we had Carol on earlier this year about her book on about her life with her father, Dutch Schultz, not the gangster, the World War II veteran. And it is a powerful book, and it was a fascinating interview about the troubles he came home with after the war. So I just asked Carol if she'd be on for this because we're going to, at least part of the discussion with David Nasaw is going to be about
Right.
that.
Carol, I thank you for your book. I read it too late. If only
That's
I
okay,
had
David.
met you earlier before I had done my research. but there were any number of stories that should be in the book.
Right. I just finished your book yesterday and I loved it. So thank you
you.
for writing it.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So for anybody that's new, my name's Glenn Flickinger. I'm the host of this program every Thursday night, Greatest Generation Live, all things World War II, where we like to interview World War II veterans and interview authors like David Nasaw about World War II. So welcome, and let's get started. David, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on.
My pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And I was holding up my book, my version of the book, a galley proof I was sent months ago. And as my people who know me, when I hold up books I've read, you can see I got a million yellow stickies in them with my notes and so forth. I don't know if that's the official academic way to do it, but since I'm not a trained historian, it's my method. So it works. David, as I like to start out with all of our guests, tell us a little bit about your background, how you got started as a historian. David is the author of many books, including one that we'll touch on before we get into the Wounded Generation, on a Pittsburgher by the name of Andrew Carnegie or Carnegie. We're not sure which era it is. Yes, one I've read because I recognize the cover. I read it many years ago. How did you come to write that book, David?
You know, I'm embarrassed. It wasn't my idea. I had published a biography of William Randolph Hearst, and my agent set up meetings for me with a variety of editors and publishers. And I said, I don't want to start a new book. I just finished this one. And she said, well, it's time. And I said, is my sell-by date coming up? And she said, well, I wouldn't put it that way, but yes. So I met with an editor at Random House. And the editor said, you know, we've done books about Rockefeller, we've done books about Morgan, but Carnegie is more interesting than any of them. You know, would you be interested in, would you want to do that? I took a train to Washington, the Library of Congress, and I opened up some of the boxes with the Carnegie papers and was astounded at this guy. His letters were voluminous, they were informative, sometimes they were angry, more often they were friendly, and they were filled with humor. So I was hooked.
And you even came to Pittsburgh, of course.
Oh, a lot, a lot. I remember, you know, any number of times coming to Pittsburgh. There were two subjects that everybody wanted to talk about. One was the Steelers, and everybody was pro-Steeler. The other was Carnegie, and half the people said he ruined the city. The other half said, thank God he gave my great-grandfather a job and a wage, and, you know, we thank him for that.
Yeah, he absolutely a fascinating character and such a central part of the Pittsburgh story of the 19th century. So it's a great read. I remember it now. I see that cover. I know I picked it up. I may have picked it up a long time ago visiting the Frick House,
Right.
Frick Mansion, I guess it is.
Yes.
Okay. So one of many books you've written, author, historian, and you teach as well still, David? Or
I did. I taught until I got out at exactly the right time, just before COVID. And it facilitated writing this book. You know, in the past, it took longer to write my books, but because I wasn't teaching, I could spend every day from when I got up to when I got too exhausted to look at my computer writing.
Yeah. So more time to concentrate.
Exactly.
So let's get into this one, the Wounded Generation. What led you to write about well, first of all, the title is interesting, of course. Sort of I don't want to say a play, but I can't think of any other word, but related to the Greatest Generation. Instead of the Greatest Generation, it's the Wounded Generation. How did you come to be interested in this topic, and why did you come to that title?
My father came back from World War II, an alcoholic, smoking 3, 4, 5 packs of Luckies every day with a heart condition. And unable to sleep through the night, I later discovered, or I discovered by accident, because as a teenager, I went to borrow a pair of socks from him. And in the sock drawer, they were the biggest pill bottles I had ever seen. And I later came to understand that he could not get to sleep at night without heavy sedatives, so heavy that he needed uppers to wake up and get through the day. And that lasted from the moment he came home to when he died. He died at age 61. The VA wrote my mother a letter and said that she would continue to get assistance because his death was service related. I never got to talk to my father about the war. I tried. God knows I tried. But he was silent. He would give me, he would smile and he would give me very, very brief answers. I never understood how he developed this heart condition in Eritrea. He ran a hospital in Eritrea. His task was to dismantle the hospital as the troops were leaving North Africa for Sicily and then for Italy. I never understood why he came home an alcoholic, though he stopped. He stopped when I was 4 years old. And as a historian, it made sense to me that if I couldn't understand this singular man, my father, because he was silent, then I would study the entire generation. And I would, through my study of this generation, try to understand something of what my father was going through. It answered some of the questions, not all of them. My father was a great man. He was a terrific father. He was a successful lawyer. But he was wounded. And he was wounded when he stopped drinking, he stopped going out. And as I said, he died at age 61, much too soon, of something that happened in the service. And the pain that he must have gone through when he tried to get to sleep at night was extraordinary. I think the wounded generation is the greatest generation. The greatest generation is the wounded generation. And one of the reasons I believe that has to do with the story of my father. Like large numbers of veterans, and let me make it clear, I know, as everybody knows, that there's no one narrative that fits all the veterans. Every story is different. 16.2, 16.4 million were in uniform during World War II, and every story is singular. Nonetheless, it became clear to me, and it became clear to the Army, and it became clear to the VA that millions of soldiers came back from World War II with what was called combat fatigue or battle fatigue at the time. World War I, it had been called shell shock. Yeah. And there was no diagnosis, there was no treatment. They were told, it'll get better with time. And it often didn't. And my father was like the other veterans who came back. He realized very early that he had to find a way forward by himself. And the veterans who came home with PTSD, wounded, were the greatest generation because they cured themselves. And how? They became exemplary citizens. They dived into work. They went back to school. They raised their families. They didn't complain. They were mostly silent. They locked themselves inside on July 4th so they didn't hear firecrackers go off.
Yeah.
They didn't watch movies about the war or read novels about the war. And they led productive lives, but the war never left them. They brought the war home on their bodies, their minds, their souls, their spirits. And whether they acknowledged it to children and wives and friends or not, it remained with them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. One of the elements that you bring up in your book, and let me say to the audience, there's so many elements, there's so many parts of this book that are interesting. We can only touch on 3 or 4 tonight at best. And in fact, David is going to come back in February. I don't have the exact date in mind. And Todd is going to interview him this time. We're going to he's going to focus more on the impact of the war, coming home from the war, on the African American population and the female population, of which there's quite a bit in the book. So we're not going to delve into that part tonight, at least at any depth. But one of the parts of the book that you bring up that I had not previously sort of thought through or read much about was the beginning of the return of the wounded from the war, which of course, started much before 1945. It started in 42 and 43, and the impact that had on the civilians that were seeing these trains of wounded men come into the various military hospitals. Could you comment on that some?
Sure. The selective service told the generals, told the commanders that in World War II, we made a mistake and we put into uniform a lot of men who weren't psychologically stable. They were psychologically weak. So we're not going to do that anymore. At every selective service office, we're going to have a psychiatrist. And before we induct a young man, we are going to make sure that he is of sound mind as well as sound body. The first land battle of the war, large land battle at Guadalcanal, shocked the Army and shocked the medical establishment because so many Marines and then GIs were rendered, in the language of the Army, ineffective. They broke down. They couldn't go on. They stopped talking. They stopped eating. They hallucinated. They were pulled off the front lines. And more often than not, they were sent to a military base, military hospital in Guam. Psychiatrists didn't know what to do. They hadn't expected this. So they gave these guys rest and relaxation and then sent them back. And within weeks or months, they were back in the hospital. And this time, the psychiatrists and the medical establishment said, we're sending these people home. And we're sending them home to get care. Maybe we can bring them back later, but they're of no use to us. The number of servicemen, airboys, sailors, Marines, GIs, who were sent home early with medical disabilities was extraordinary. And half of those medical disabilities were for what was called psychoneurotic problems, which meant that, well, you can imagine what it meant. It meant that they were suffering from some sort of PTSD and nobody knew what to do. So they were sent home. This happened throughout the war. Because the United States of America was supplying and had to build from the ground up, not only a military establishment, munitions and planes and artillery and guns and all the rest for the American army, but we supplied the Soviet army and the British Army as well. And that meant that large numbers of able-bodied men and 7 to 9 million women had to work in munitions factories, which meant that the generals never got the number of replacements that they needed, which meant that a lot of the servicemen, especially in Germany at the end of the last year of the war, these guys had to stay on the front lines for days, weeks, sometimes months. And the results were disastrous.
Yeah. Early in the war, actually just before the war started, there was a U.S. Army study that was actually slipped to the newspapers called Operation Victory, where the proposal was to have 225 combat divisions raised for World War II. That was dropped back to 90 instead, plus the 6 Marine divisions that eventually came into place. Mostly because they realized they needed these men at home in order to produce all these goods, right?
Yeah.
And that resulted particularly in Europe, starting with the Battle of the Bulge and afterwards, where the casualties were so high, this incredible manpower shortage. That's when they began to recruit African Americans into the frontline units, cooks and people who hadn't been trained for combat and brought in. And still, it really was a close run thing from a combat manpower point of view.
The Army in the beginning set up these special units to train draftees who scored all the way at the top of the intelligence tests to be engineers, to be scientists, to serve the Army in a variety of capacities. By late 1943, 1944, everybody was sent overseas. Henry Kissinger was at Lehigh University studying engineering. Kurt Vonnegut was in Indiana, the author, studying. And they were reassigned to infantry units. Kissinger then gets into an intelligence unit, and boom, they're sent overseas to be there in time for D-Day. Dave Brubeck, Dave Brubeck, the pianist, is playing piano in an Army band in California and having a great time. He's pulled out and sent overseas. In World War I, about half the men in uniform served overseas. In World War II, it was 3/4. In World War I, the average time in uniform was less than 12 months.
Yeah.
World War II, it was almost 3 years. And the number of men, the average time overseas was 1.5 years. That's the average. There were lots and lots of people over that 1.5 years overseas. In the Civil War, you could come home for the harvest.
And we're talking very
Yeah.
young men, 18, 19, 20 years old.
That's right.
But, men being an argument as to whether that term applies. Young boys at that point, 18, 19. At least when I was 18 or 19, I know I was a boy.
Yeah. Yeah. The number, that FDR and the Joint Chiefs and the War Department, by 1943, they began to understand that the war was not going to be over rapidly. And that the American people believed, certainly after North Africa, and then after Mussolini is thrown out of office, and certainly after D-Day, that the war is going to be over. Boom. But it wasn't going to be over. And no one knew about the atomic bomb at the time. The feeling was that the war was in Japan. If the war in Europe was over by 1945, 1946, it would go on for several more years. So the decision was made. The decision was made to lighten up the censorship and to allow Bill Malden to draw his cartoons, to allow Ernie Pyle and a number of other correspondents to tell the story of what was going on there, to let the radio announcers tell the home front, to let the newsreel photographers and Life magazine and Look and Saturday Evening Post tell the American people what was going on. And the anxiety, the fear grew at home. What is going to happen to our young men? What is going to happen? Glenn, you're absolutely right. What's going to happen to our boys? We sent an innocent child over there. He's been away for 2-3 years. He's learned to kill. He's been in a male-only hierarchical unit. You know, what's going to happen when he comes home?
Yeah.
And as the newsreels, you know, there are these stories of kids and grown-ups and young people, you know, going to the movies to watch Bing Crosby. But before they got to Bing Crosby, they had to watch a newsreel and a public service announcement. Everybody knew what was going on over there.
So you're saying that the administration, the government, as it became apparent the war was going to be a long war, opened up to educate the American public as to how difficult, how serious this was going to be on the men and boys that were sent and women that were sent to fight.
Yeah, it was 2 years into the war before Life magazine was allowed to publish a photograph of a dead GI, and it was very tastefully presented. But if you look at the newsreels that begin to come back, and if you listen to the radio commentary, which I did, and read the newspapers and the magazines, you see that, you know, historians have done a really bad job because we want to blame the government for this and blame the government for that, and especially for censorship. But that wasn't the case in World War II. Of course, no enlisted man could write a letter without someone reading over his shoulder, you know, and no enlisted man, no one was allowed to say, I'm here and I'm going there. Nonetheless, the amount of information about the war and the brutality of the war, God, you look at these newsreels and these pictures in Life magazine, and you see these guys slogging up the boot of Italy, you know, into France. You see what goes on at D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge. And it's real. It's real. It's frightening.
Yeah. Another aspect of the book that educated me was that the concern at the home from all this news, from all these newsreels, from all this information provided to the public, was the concern as early as 43 and 44 about what these men would be like when they return home. You know, would they be sort of, you know, beasts that couldn't control their urge to kill, you know, to put it bluntly and rather macabrely, but speak to that for a little bit.
Yeah, it was overblown and it was overdone and it made headlines, but part of it was real. From end of 1943 through 44 and 45, there was this increasing worry that one, the nation was going to had only pulled out of the Depression because of the war and more production and sending millions of men overseas and out of the job market. There was a fear that when the war was over, when 17 to 19 million war workers were let go, when 12 million at the end of the war, there were 12 million in uniform. When they came home, we go right back into depression. And you didn't have to be a genius to remember that not a long time ago, not a long time before, 20 years earlier, the Italian veterans and the German veterans, disgruntled, unemployed, homeless, were the backbone of fascism and Nazism. Now, that wasn't going to happen in the United States of America, but that didn't stop the newspapers from talking about it, the newsreels from talking about it, and the police from exaggerating what was going on. J. Edgar Hoover talked continually about it. He said, we got two problems. One, all these young men who have been raised without fathers and are now juvenile delinquents. And two, the fathers coming back, having learned how to kill and having learned not to celebrate violence, but that violence was part of life. What's going to happen when they come home? There's this extraordinary article I found from 1944. The Attorney General of California holds a meeting of law enforcement officers throughout the state, all the sheriffs, the police chiefs. And he says to them, he says, you know, the Army is allowing the veterans to bring home souvenirs. He said, and from Europe, they're going to bring home pistols and, you know, and rifles, he said. And from the Pacific, they're going to bring home swords. He said, well, be aware that these are lethal weapons that they're bringing home with them. And God knows what's going to happen. So let us be prepared. Now, when, you know, the home front reads this stuff, to add to the fear, Hollywood added to the fear with any number of films starring, and this continues after the war, Alan Ladd, Humphrey Bogart, Robert Ryan, Robert Montgomery, Brando, Garfield, Dana Andrews. And there are any number of films about angry, angry, angry veterans who come back and they want to take revenge on commanding officers who they believe led to the slaughter of their comrades. They come back and they want to take revenge against civilians who had had a great time while they were away. They want to take revenge against their wives and girlfriends who had been unfaithful. And there's film after film that Hollywood produces. So the home front it greets the return, the homecoming with joy, but that joy is tinged with anxiety, and it takes a while for that anxiety to lessen.
And while there were definitely specific instances of violence, domestic violence, or whatever, it does prove to be mostly overblown that these men come home. But what impressed me, maybe I don't get impressed by government very often, but in this case, if someone had asked me before I read your book, when did the GI Bill get started? When did people say we're going to have a GI Bill and they passed it? I'd have said, sometime in 45. But the reality is they were thinking about this in 44, 43.
43, yeah. 43, they begin talking about it. And the American Legion is way out front here. The American Legion watches the return of the wounded, the disabled, the disgruntled, and it says, we're not taking care of these guys. We've got a real problem here. And the American Legion and Roosevelt and congressmen, they begin to think about a GI Bill. And it's the American Legion that comes up with the idea of, instead of having, 120 different bills being debated in Congress and it taking years and years to get them through, let's have one big GI Bill. And Roosevelt eventually comes around to that. Now we've got to be clear again, as a historian, I've got to look beyond the established narrative. The bill that's passed in June of 1944 is intended to reward the veterans for their service. In every American war, we've rewarded our veterans, from the Revolutionary War to every war, to the Indian Wars, to the Mexican War. They've been given land grants, they've been given old age pensions, they've been given help, medical help. So in June of 44, the bill is passed. And by December of 1945, even earlier, it becomes abundantly clear that it is not generous enough, that the veterans need more. So the bill is continually revised, extended, with new benefits offered. And it is a remarkable bill. It is probably the greatest piece of legislation in the 20th century. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have, problems from the very beginning, that it doesn't have problems. Let me give you one problem. The veterans coming back thought that they were going to get mortgages to buy homes. Well, they didn't get mortgages. They got mortgage guarantees. So you had to get a mortgage first from your local bank before you could get a guarantee. And more importantly, you had to find an affordable home to buy. During the Depression, no new housing had been built. During the war, no new housing had been built. There was the worst housing crisis this nation has ever seen that greeted the veterans on their return. And it was not until 4 or 5 years after their return, that William Levitt and a bunch of other developers discovered, some of them had done war work, had put up housing for the Army and war workers. They discovered that there were ways to build Levitt towns and other developments that the veterans could afford. But that's 4 or 5 years after they returned.
So what did they do in the meantime? You had quite a few stories in there about what some.
Bill Malden has this great cartoon he has a number of cartoons about looking for homes and homeless guys talking to one another in the parks. The government dismantled barracks, dismantled bases, sent them to the cities. The cities relocated them for veterans. Quonset huts, tents, wooden barracks with tin roofs. And the most common solution, which was one that the veterans did not like at all, was that the veterans on returning home had to move in with their parents or their in-laws. Or they had to move in with other veterans or other veteran families. I mean, there are a bunch of stories. The veteran comes back, he wants to be with his family, right? But there's no room at the in-laws. So he finds an apartment somewhere else and visits the family. The stories are horrendous. There are, Congress sends out investigators to look into what's going on. And in city after city after city, they are told that we don't know what to do. We don't have the money to put up housing. And the federal government isn't willing to give us the money to put up the housing. And mortgage guarantees don't help if there aren't affordable houses to buy for the veterans. Part of the solution is the number of veterans who go away to college. And they live in reconverted dormitories and Quonset huts and tents. And that's okay because they believe it's going to be temporary. And in many cases it is.
What was the I can't remember the name of it right now, David, but there was also for every veteran, there was a certain amount of compensation provided for them. Was it $52 for 52 weeks? What was
Yeah,
it?
it was, I don't remember the exact dollar amount. It was for 52 weeks. The GI Bill wrote into one of its provisions was special unemployment compensation. That was much better than any state was offering or any city was offering. And for 52 weeks, the veterans could get their unemployment insurance. And they tell different stories. One guy comes home, a kid, he's 19 years old. He hangs around at home, collects his unemployment insurance, figures he's going to collect it for a year, and his father calls him in and says, "You better get out there and get yourself a job, do something. There are no bums in this family." Other guys, they come home and their wives, and their parents say, "Look, you deserve a vacation." The veterans, very, very, very few veterans took the full 52 weeks because they didn't want to. They didn't want to be bums. They wanted to try to get on with their lives. The part of the GI Bill, part of the GI Bill is to make sure there's no return to depression, is that the veterans were kept off the unemployment lines. They were kept off they didn't have to look for a job for a year or for however long they wanted to get their unemployment insurance. And then they could go back to school, a vocational school, college, graduate school, and they would not only get free tuition, but they would get what were at the time very generous living allowances for the government. So what did that do? You put the two together, and the GI Bill gives a 5-year buffer between the time buffer for the war economy to be converted to a peacetime economy.
Well, I would argue, not argue, but I would make the point that conveniently along comes the Korean War, obviously much smaller, but also along comes the Cold War and the development of the military industrial establishment.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. In the beginning, I chart this in the book. In 1945, 1946, 1947, the defense budget is dwarfed by the money that's given to the veterans through the GI Bill. Harry Truman and the Pentagon want to spend more, but there's a sense in Congress and among the public, we don't want to spend more on defense. It's not until 1948, 1949, really 1950, that the military industrial complex assumes huge dimensions and begins to bring in dollars that are then put into the economy. But in 45, 46, 47, 48, the economy is sustained because money goes from Congress to the VA to the veterans. The veterans spend it. Think what happens to a college town. College towns, and there are a lot of towns and a lot of cities that have vocational schools, that have colleges. The GIs come to these places with living allowances, and they sustain the local economy. The GI Bill creates we'll talk about this later with Todd, I assume. The GI Bill creates a middle class, a new middle class, that is predominantly white and male. And it is extraordinary. You know, you look at the number of people who jump classes from working class or lower working class to the professional class. You know, the GIs are incredible students. Everybody thinks all the college presidents said in the beginning, well, we'll take some of them, we'll take the smartest ones, you know. But this GI Bill is nonsense because the great unwashed veterans aren't going to be students. Well, they were the best students the colleges had ever seen.
Yeah.
They outperformed the non-veterans in every way. They didn't fool around, these guys. They knew what they wanted. And a lot of them went on to become or scientists or technologists or technicians or doctors or lawyers.
Well,
The professional middle class.
that's a great segue, David, if I could, to Russell Freeberg, who is one of the greatest generation, who goes on to be quite an accomplished professional journalist in his career. Russell, you come back from the war. Do you take advantage of the GI Bill?
We'll ask you to unmute, Russell.
Sorry, I thought he was.
You're good. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. Yes, I certainly did take advantage of the GI Bill. I had a little over a year of college before the war, but after the war, I went down to visit Washington University and talked to the dean of admissions. She suggested I start at summer school, which I did, and I went right straight through for 2 years and got a degree in 1948.
So
And-
you got a 4-year degree in
And-
3 years.
In uh, in the meantime, I married, and as David says, I got $90 a month living expenses in addition to the tuition. And my wife worked as a service representative for Southwestern Bell, and so we had quite a good income, uh, even though I was in school. Yeah.
And is that your story pretty much a story of the veteran friends that you had that came back from the war? Most of them took advantage of the GI Bill and went to school, or do you remember any of their stories?
Well, many of them took advantage of the GI Bill and went to college. Yeah, but they were in college or preparing for college before they were called into military service. So it was just a continuation of their lives. But there was at Washington University, there were many that were married, and we kind of created our own society for entertainment and uh, visiting and bridge and cards and so on. Uh, although I did live in a fraternity house for half a year before we married.
Let me throw an oddball question at you, Russell. I hope you don't mind. Did you smoke when you came back from the war?
No, I never smoked. And
Never smoked.
And in Europe, during the war, I sold, they gave us a carton of cigarettes, I think, every 2 weeks. I'm not sure of that. And I sold my carton every time it came and banked the money. And I had maybe $3,000 in a bank account just from selling cigarettes.
Holy cow. Now, I'm sure you paid taxes on that, right, Russell?
No, I didn't have enough income to pay taxes.
You know,
Well,
as I
David
said,
makes the point about how many men, because we threw these jillions of cigarettes at our veterans, our servicemen, how many of them came back, smoking to an incredible degree to the point it was harmful to their health. David?
Yeah,
Yeah.
including Eisenhower.
Oh, geez. He was one of the worst.
Yeah, he was one of the worst.
Just adding that the $3,000 you saved, Russell, was $56,000 today. That's just adjusted for
Really?
inflation. Yeah.
Russell, you were a very smart man. My father wasn't that smart, and he started smoking. Bob Dole said that he never smoked or wanted to smoke. He was an athlete before he went into the service. He said,
Yeah.
but if the Army's giving me all these cigarettes, they can't be bad for me. And he began to smoke. The Army gave, tobacco farmers were exempt from the draft because the Army believed that they performed an essential service. There were, I mean, cigarettes were in every ration pack. The guys who went over on D-Day got an extra carton. Ernie Pyle, when he surveyed the beaches the day after the landing, he saw piles and piles of cigarettes on the beach of those guys who never made it to shore. It's hard to blame people. I don't know enough, and to blame the Army for providing the cigarettes. I don't know what was known at the time, but what I do know is that the veterans generation suffered more from diseases connected to nicotine addiction than any other group of Americans. You compared veterans to non-veterans, the veterans were more likely to get lung cancer, heart disease, and a variety of other diseases that were linked to their intake of nicotine.
Yeah. Let me ask Carol, are you unmuted? Carol, let me unmute you.
Okay.
Hi, Carol.
Hi.
Thanks for being here. Do you remember your father coming back from the war? At least I know you were very, very young, but in the 50s, was he smoking?
He smoked a lot. I was born a year after he returned. I was born in 46, and he smoked a lot. He died at 82 of emphysema. He said he quit smoking in his 40s, but he smoked cigars from then on. So, uh, and he said he didn't inhale, but he really did. And the point I wanted to make in terms of employment, he worked as a store detective for about a year after the war, but that was all he could find. So he rejoined the Army, and he was an Army counterintelligence agent who was domestic and also was sent overseas for training. And he had told me Henry Kissinger was one of his instructors in the European Intelligence Command School. And he ended up being an Army counterintelligence agent for about 12 years.
My God.
That was his route out of, the unemployment issue. He went back into the Army.
Yeah. Well, the other addictive element of the men like David's father, and I know Carol, yours father, was alcohol coming back as a way to deal with the combat fatigue, the PTSD, whatever you want to characterize it. Russell, I don't want to go into your personal history, but did you see that among your friends? Was alcohol a abusive sort of problem with any of your friends?
Well, no, I didn't. During the war, one day I was sergeant of the guard and was preparing men to do guard work. And one of them was standing in line and suddenly went blind. And he'd been drinking sugared gasoline in the afternoon. And I always heard that the medics in the hospitals drank diluted alcohol and put sugar in it. So there was quite a bit of some drinking during the war. Yeah. Of course, you found German stashes of beer and schnapps and so on as you rolled along and took territory and prisoners. So there really was a multitude of chances to drink if you wanted to.
And certainly, David, like your father, and I know Carol, your father, once they came home from the war and dealt with the problems they had, alcohol was often the drug of choice, if you will, to deal with it.
Yeah, one of the tragedies of the failure of diagnosing PTSD is these guys didn't understand that this was a specific disorder. This was an illness they came home with. And as a result, they took to the bottle. Now many had learned to do it, especially after I talk about it in the book. There's a significant period of time between VE Day, VJ Day, and repatriation. And in Europe and in the Pacific, after the ceasefires, and before there were sufficient ships available to bring the guys back, they had nothing to do except drink. And in Europe, as Russell said, there was plenty of alcohol on hand. In the Pacific, there was less. And in the Pacific, James Jones, the great, great novelist, and William Manchester, they talk about the making hooch, and that it tastes awful and you could occasionally go blind. But there was nothing else available. For the enlisted men, the officers got hard liquor and they didn't share it.
Yeah, yeah. So
Well,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Germany, they were great beer drinkers, and we would reopen the breweries, and would go to the breweries for deliveries at least twice a week, and bring in some of the beer was 12%. So you could get quite a buzz on.
12%. Wow. I've never heard of that one. Listen, it's 8 o'clock. If we could take just a short station break, Sean, and then I'd like to come back and open this conversation up to everybody that's online. And I've noticed a few comments in the chat. Let's try to get into a little bit more of a interactive dialogue.
Sure thing. Just a quick note for everyone. We are the Veterans Breakfast Club, and we have a free quarterly magazine. What you are seeing is our current issue, the fall issue, Odysseus in America. It's all about coming home. So in line with our theme tonight, we interviewed many veterans about this over the years, and you'll find multiple stories about that in this magazine. Again, you could get this physically in your mailbox for free if you just send us your address. If you don't get it already, it's because we don't have your address, so send that to us. We'll make sure to get you a copy. Or you could check it out on our website, veteransbreakfastclub.org. Just scroll around, you'll find magazine, and you could read it online there as well, because even though we get about 12,000 to 15,000 copies of this to hand out, we sell out of them pretty quick. So make sure that you get a copy and get on the mailing address so that you can get the next issue. We also have a program on Monday, the Battle of Dak To, 1967, where I think it's the 58th anniversary of this battle. So we'll be talking about that on November 24th. And as is to next Thursday, there's a holiday, something going on with Turkey and families getting together and all that fun stuff. So Todd was nice enough to give Glenn and I the night off. So,
Hey!
hey. So we won't be on next Thursday night, but we will be back on Monday, December 1st, where we're going to be interviewing a 103-year-old. He is a World War II veteran, Gene Metcalf. So make sure you join us Monday, December 1st for that conversation.
82nd Airborne veteran.
Yes.
Fought at Operation Market Garden in the Netherlands. So that'd be very good.
Absolutely. So back to the program.
Okay. So let's open this up. Does anybody have questions of our guests? Could be David, could be Russell, could be Carol. I'd like to eventually bring Carol in a little bit more about her experience with PTSD and her father, but for right now, do we have questions? Anything in the chat that someone would like to? I see a Renee. I'll unmute her. Hi, Renee.
Get you. There we go, Renee.
When I don't know if how many of y'all remember the NBC white papers of I think the 70s, but my parents and aunt and I were watching one Sunday afternoon, and it was on PTSD when it was first being recognized. And at the end of the program, my mother said, "That was your father when he came home from World War II." And I was so shocked because he'd always been so stable. Well, he would he stayed on active duty, but he was assigned to National Guard in St. Augustine as cadre. And of course, I don't remember this because of my age, being one or two, but he had some really serious issues, flashbacks and everything. My mother told me later. So it was never discussed while he was alive. But the Army sent him up to Fort Gordon, Georgia for treatment. And on his DD-214, so he would not be adversely affected, it shows he was treated for ulcers. Never recognized as because it would have affected his career. He was planning on staying in. But when I saw Mr. Nasaw on Sunday morning a few weeks ago, it was just like, boom, somebody's finally recognizing that there were a lot more like my father out there.
Right.
They eventually came around, but it was just sort of shattering to me, who always did believe in the greatest generation and all these men who came home and were hale and hearty and just ready to take on the world.
I might ask Carol to comment on that because that's very much her book and her experience with her father.
I'm going to get that book.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Hidden Legacy of World War II. Carol Schultz-Vento. Carol?
Oh, I've already looked it up on Amazon.
Great.
My dad came home with, my mom said he was totally different. He drank a lot. They were considering getting divorced the first year that they were married. And his parents were in California. My mom was from Philadelphia. She went back to Philadelphia. They were going to get divorced, and she found out she was pregnant with me. So they stayed married. They stayed married for 12 years. He was in the counterintelligence then, but I do remember that he came home every night. He would go to the bar across the street, and he would get these 2-quart bottles of beer and slowly sip it through the night. He controlled his alcoholism until my mother divorced him after 12 years. And then he basically hit bottom and became a pretty severe alcoholic, up to the point where he was considering suicide and called me one night, or trying to talk to my mom, and said he was going to kill himself. And I was the one who was there and took the phone call when I was 16. That's the last time he had a drink. He didn't commit suicide, but he had hit bottom. He tried to get help from the VA from 47 on. After he died, I tried to get the papers from his VA appeals. They were 1,000 pages. And finally, when he was 80, because he died at 82, he got 100% disability for PTSD. And they paid him retroactively a certain amount.
Oh,
But
my.
he would say to me, Carol, they want me to die or go away, and I'm not going to. But and I looked at some of his diagnoses: inability to digest wartime experiences, psychoneurosis, alcoholic, limited ability to change. He ended up going back to school on GI Bill, getting a bachelor's in the late 60s, getting a master's, and then becoming the director of drug and alcohol rehab programs. His last job before he retired in the 60s was in Fort Irwin, California, working with soldiers who had drug and alcohol problems. So what David said about how they just kept trying and kept trying, I saw that in my dad, but I also didn't understand until much later in life when I started asking him a lot of questions. What was the war like that? And he finally started telling me the truth. The fact that he was portrayed in The Longest Day, and I went to that premiere in Philadelphia with him when I was like 14 or 15, and it was black and white, and he was lost, and that was my image of his war. So it wasn't until much later that I realized what he had gone through.
It's the many fascinating parts of your father's story, but the part about him, in effect, being a World War II celebrity via The Longest Day book and The Longest Day movie, and then subsequent books too. All that while he's underneath, he's really suffering.
Right. Right.
Difficult.
Yeah.
Difficult.
Like out of me.
Yeah. Okay, I saw someone else with their hand up for a second there. I missed it though. Sean, someone else.
Someone wants to wave their hand.
I saw electronic hand for a moment there. Oh,
Justin, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, there we go.
I just want to comment on the conversation about, them coming back and not really wanting to talk about anything. My father, there were 7 friends of his here in Dallas. They all came back together. They were 3 or 4 had been wounded, but they all would not say anything to me. As many questions as I would ask, until in 1966, I came back from OCS at Fort Sill, Oklahoma on my way to flight school. And all of a sudden they wanted to talk a little bit. And I started asking more questions. They still really wouldn't talk about the war and stuff. But when I came back from Vietnam, my dad had a cocktail party. Every single one of them had me over their house almost once a week to talk about his experience, comparing it to mine. And I wish I'd written it all down. But for all of them, it worked out pretty well, and they all lived to be 80 plus. So I'm hoping that worked. But I agree with you that the one big thing today is when I try to talk about the experience, especially with my other vets that are friends of mine or acquaintances, because if they'll talk about it a little bit with me, then maybe they'll talk about it with their families. Yeah. And so I tell people, don't tell the gory stuff. Tell some of the fun experiences. Like trying to procure 5 pounds of beer off the Saigon docks with no one knowing about it. Yeah. And there were a lot of other things. The guys were talking about how they had to take a shower in Vietnam. It wasn't very hard because it rained every day.
Justin, it's a great story because, what I hear you saying is it wasn't until you came home as a veteran, a Vietnam veteran, that these World War II era veterans, I guess, felt they could trust you to talk about their experiences.
That's pretty much it. I remember Bob, my dad's closest friend in World War II. He was an artillery officer, foreign observer, and I came out of OCS, and my father was questioning me at a little luncheon thing. Why was I going to flight school? The pilots were dying like flies over there in Vietnam. And I looked over at Joe and said, out of curiosity, you were a foreign observer in World War II. I have 2 choices right now. I can go over there and slug it in the mud and be with all the time and still get shot at, or I can go fly helicopters, get shot at also, but possibly every night I can come back for a Coke or a beer. And Joe looked at my father and says, you got a pretty smart son. But anyway.
Which, unless someone else has a comment or question, I was going to move to another thought here, because we have so many Vietnam veterans on with us and other veterans, younger veterans. The GI Bill still exists, right? It existed. Existed continuously.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
and-
it was never as generous as it was for the World War II vets, but it's there. It's there. And, may it remain there and may it survive as long as we have veterans alive and future generations of veterans.
Right, right. And clearly, as you saw on the front cover of our magazine, coming home from war is not unique to World War II. It's unique to it's a part of any of the wars that we have fought over 250 years, going back to the Revolutionary War. Which, by the way, if any of you haven't been watching Ken Burns' presentation of the Revolutionary War on PBS, I'm mesmerized by it. So just highly recommend it as a way to commemorate our 250th anniversary as a country. So, okay. Other comments or questions? I saw Chuck Bartlett had quite a few comments in the chat. Chuck, would you like to be recognized? I don't see Chuck on the screen though. There he is.
Yep, I'm looking for him. If you found him, yep, you found him. Okay.
Chuck. Oh,
You can't unmute. There you go. Oh,
Okay.
we can hear you.
Well, I was Marine Corps Reserve 1952, 1954, Air Force 1954 to 1968. And the comments about the drinking, I think, go on for every war and every situation. I remember now that there was a tremendous amount of drinking going on among the flight crews, and we had commanders call at the officers club every Friday night. And I can talk about times that the commander would order 4 airplanes to go out and fly formation at night after everybody was flying drunk. And so I don't think that's anything new. I really appreciate all these comments that David's making, but if we look at the alternative, I know this is all sacrifice. We look at the alternative, if these young men hadn't sacrificed not just their lives over there, but the lives after they came back, we'd be speaking German or Arabic right now, or maybe Japanese on the West Coast. I don't know, but that's all I had to say. I just don't know what the solutions are for these problems.
yeah, Chuck, I wish there was a solution, but being an amateur historian anyway, and having read lots and lots of history about the world for 2,000 years, these are the same problems that Odysseus had during the Trojan War. We as a mankind, we don't seem to learn our lessons, and the technology only gets worse and worse. So it just compounds the problems. Yes,
I can add one final thought. I think that in the 1980s, the psychiatric profession recognized PTSD, and the VA established any number of centers for research into PTSD and treatments for PTSD. So let us hope, that in the future, the men who come home and the women with PTSD, they can find some solace in knowing that they're not crazy.
Yeah.
They've got an illness, and that the VA will continue its research. We don't have a cure. We have treatments. We can ameliorate the pain. And we've got to continue to work on this.
Yeah, clearly the medical establishment has come a long way from, let's say, World War I, when it was just considered, or the British just considered it cowardice.
Yeah.
So David, I don't know how familiar you are with the Masters of the Air series that was on a year or so ago, and Don Miller's work, the book The Masters of the Air, and some of the other books that were associated with that. But I would say in World War II, it was those psychiatrists, psychologists associated with the 8th Air Force that first began to find a way to treat these men. I mean, there were I forget what they called them, but the retreat houses that were set up to give them some relief from the constant need to get back on that airplane and go, over the continent to bomb when, their odds of making it back were so low, but yet they got on those planes and they had to overcome that mental trauma all the time. So
Yeah, it was there were retreat houses and recovery centers through Florida, and they were extraordinary. But it's not, it's not a temporary disorder that you can get over. And it took 40 to 50 years after these guys returned for the VA to recognize this and for the men themselves to recognize what had happened to them.
yeah, it's too bad. I don't know why George Rubin couldn't come on. Of course, I didn't invite him until the last moment. But George Rubin, World War II, B-17 veteran. We've had him on several times. I don't mind. I don't think he'd mind if I repeat real quick his story, where he had a very crash landed, almost killed a couple of times after he crash landed his B-17 in January of 45. Comes back from the war, becomes a professional, and doesn't suffer any apparent consequences of PTSD until he retires. And once he retired and didn't have the everyday rush of work and raising a family and so forth, is when he began to suffer. And to this day, he leads a group of PTSD sufferers in the VA hospital near his home somewhere up in the New England area.
Yeah.
And,
I talk about there were any number of cases of people, men in their 80s and their 90s, when the armor that they had built around themselves disappeared, often when their partners died, when their wives died, when they retired, they were hit and hit hard. And the only solution for them was to be part of groups with other veterans and to talk through what had happened. And that provided a solace. It didn't cure them, but it was easier to live.
yeah, we've got some noise in the background, Sean.
There's just a little bit of feedback from Al's mic. Al, we'll unmute you whenever you're ready for your question.
Yeah, let's unmute
Okay.
Al now. You want to do it, Sean? Or...
Yep. Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, I was told in Vietnam, for every one person who was in a combat role, artillery, infantry, whatever, there were 6 people who were in support roles. And I understand in Vietnam, even in the support role, you get mortared every once in a while and whatever. But I wonder, all those who came back who were not in combat roles, they came back without PTSD. I wonder in World War II, was it the same way? Well, I imagine there's a lot of people in World War II who were in support roles who never had situations that would be associated with or bring on PTSD. So help me with that. Was it?
Well,
Was that true?
yeah, the VA discovered, and again, this is late. This is late. They discovered that, of course, the combat veterans were more likely to get PTSD, but there were any number of men who weren't in combat roles who saw what had happened. Look, if you're at an Air Force base in England and you're not in combat, but you watch the planes come back or not come back, I mean, you know, that hurts. Those are memories that you don't get over.
Those
And
are friends. Those are friends
those are
that
friends, those are comrades.
the mechanics that kept the plane in the air when their friend didn't come back. Also an impact.
Yeah, and there are large numbers, not all of them. The other thing we got to remember is that 3/4 of the veterans spend time overseas. And, it's not easy to get overseas, to get to the Pacific. Your life is in danger. And when you get there, your life is in danger, whether it's much more in danger if you're at the front in combat, but large numbers in the rear also suffered.
Nancy.
Yes, the comment was made that thank goodness PTSD is recognized now, and it's recognized by the military. But on the other hand, if somebody goes for help for PTSD, their military career can be damaged, at least in the past. I don't know if that's gotten any better, but so many people don't try to get help or admit, if you want to use that word, to the fact that they are suffering from symptoms of PTSD.
I think that's exactly this. It's the same now. There are veterans of Vietnam. Look, I've talked to people at the VA. The official statistics are, from 5 to 25% of Vietnam veterans have at one time or another suffered from PTSD. The young man who I worked with, or who I met, I think in St. Louis, said no. Anybody who works at the VA knows it's closer to 40%. And the veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq, I mean, there are huge numbers who suffer. And they suffer from survivor's guilt, which leads to PTSD. And they suffer from what any number of Robert Leckie, a great historian who writes about his experience in the war. He says you suffer from the sense that you're expendable. Once you enter the army, you're expendable. And that's hard to live with.
I was working as a counselor when the Iraq-Afghanistan veterans were coming back, but they weren't coming to the vet center to get help. And one of the Vietnam veterans said, wait till they've had a couple of DIs and 3 divorces, and then they'll come in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which we didn't talk about this, but it's in your book, it's in Carol's book, when in 1945 and 46 and 47 was the highest divorce rate in the United States ever until the 70s, I suppose, or so, directly related to the issues with these men returning home in such a very different mentality, a personality change, even, if you will.
Exactly.
Yeah. 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 Anything else from the audience?
There was a question in the chat from Corky. Was there a difference between the ground troops and the 8th Army Air Force guys combat returnees?
It's nearly impossible to know. It depends where you're ground troop, where you are. If you're at Guadalcanal, it's different from you're in the Bulge or going up the boot of Italy, or at Anzio. What we know is there's no predicting. There's no predicting what's going to happen to these men. The only thing we know is the longer you're at the front, the more likely you are to get PTSD, number one. And for the World War II veterans, the POWs and the men who liberated the concentration camps were more likely to get PTSD. But other than that, because we didn't diagnose it, it wasn't studied until 50 years later. So there's a lot of guesswork involved.
The POW element of this, David, last year we did probably half a dozen shows on the Stalags, the 8th Air Force, well, all the Air Force POW camps in Europe. And a couple of women, Nancy Putman, Marilyn Walton, whose fathers were POWs, and the books they've written and so forth. It's a whole nother sort of topic within a topic.
Yes, absolutely.
And of course, the men who suffered through the Japanese POW thing it's almost unconscionable to think of. I think I saw someone with a hand up physically. Was it Corky? Okay. And then we'll go to Rick. Rick, I was going to recognize you anyway, just because I want to tease you some.
Really? Go ahead.
Okay, Corky, can we hear? Can you unmute?
Yeah, there you go.
There you go, Corky.
The reason I asked that question is I had a similar experience with my dad. He flew 43 missions out of England and B-17s and came home, and I used to go to the reunions with him, but we fully didn't contact with each other until I came home after my first tour, or my first and only tour, when I came home from Thailand. And I remember when he'd fall asleep in the family room, and the nightmares would happen, and continuously happen. And we didn't know at the time, but going to the reunions with him and the guys who climbed in that airplane, mission after mission after mission, I asked them because I wanted to know how, I give you the first and second missions because you don't know what's happening. But how do you get in 3, 4, 5, 6 for Dad 43 times? And to a man, they all said it was our job.
Yeah.
It was our job, and they all came home. We didn't know it at the time. In the 50s and 60s, it was PTS. But now, now we have the term for it. And he passed away just shy of his 80th birthday. But it was hard, growing up. And I'm sure Carol can attest to this. It was hard growing up because you didn't know what to expect from and he'd fall asleep and the missions would start happening. And it really occurred to me one time, and I know I'm taking a couple minutes. It really occurred. We went to I was with him in Savannah at the 8th Air Force Convention. The bomb group convention, I'm sorry. And in Savannah, they have an 8th Air Force Museum. And as you go through the museum, you go from briefing room to the ready room to flying the mission and then coming home, right? It's all, and you move from one room to another. We got into the mission area and we're watching combat films, and they injected gunpowder, not gunpowder, it starts with a C. Mine is a terrible thing to waste. And a number of guys, half of them left.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't take it. So it brought back those, they're instantly back in combat. And, we talked about it at dinner afterwards. It was an amazing thing to see and to hear from them firsthand why it took them back. With 30-40% loss rates on single missions. Yeah. So I found it, David, I found it fascinating. I just in fact ordered your book. So
Thank you.
That,
Thank you. Thank you. You
'Cause I
know,
wanted-
let me
try to
just
understand.
Yeah, let me tell one story, and then I have to be in Miami tomorrow to talk about the book. So I'm gonna have to go. But the story of Jimmy Stewart, we still don't have a good biography. We know that he was removed, he became a passenger in some of the bombers because he had lost his edge. And he came home with what we now know as PTSD. And he moved in with Henry Fonda, his old friend who had been in the Navy. And he moved into Jane Fonda and her brother's, I forget his name, playhouse. And for 6 months, the two of them built model airplanes. Jimmy Stewart was asked time and time and time again to star in the Jimmy Stewart story.
Yeah.
And he said, absolutely not. He said, I
So
wasn't.
there's a Pittsburgh man in the township over next to mine. I'm blanking on his name right now. We've had him on the program a couple of times, who wrote a biography about Jimmy Stewart, and a lot of it focused on his problems. You know, he went to the Flack House at least twice, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And it's a very good biography. I'm not sure you've read it, but I'll get the name of it and the author and email that to you.
I believe Greg Yost put it in the chat. Mission Jimmy Stewart and the
Oh,
Fight for
yes.
Europe
It's
by
a
Robert
terrific
Mattson.
book.
Yeah.
Bob
Very
Mattson.
good book. And I learned a lot from it.
He's a great guy, Bob Mattson. Thank you, Greg. You've got twice the memory I have these days. We have run up to the witching hour and a bit past. If I could get a one-liner from Rick Weber, we'll close with Rick. And I actually don't want to tease Rick. I want to thank Rick.
Oh, no, I thought you were going to, no, you said you wanted to tease me. That's fine.
I wanted to thank
Hey,
you.
Warren Goss got me when you were there, because you heard Warren Goss get me. So if Warren Goss can get me, Glenn Flickinger can get me. I will accept it, because you did a great job. Seriously.
I spoke at a veterans group meeting up in Franklin Township last Saturday, and 4 World War II vets there, and it was a great affair. Thank you, Rick, for inviting me.
Well, it was my honor to have someone of your stature. Seriously.
Old and fat. That was that sort of.
Oh, no. So you were the third one. We had Rocky Blyer. Got Rocky Blyer to come in, and Todd. So it's going to be pretty tough to fill those 3 shoes. So you did great.
Thank you. Well, listen, let's close with thanking David for your time. It really is a fascinating book, David. Highly recommend it to all. Carol, thank you for coming on tonight and reprising a bit of the story of your father. And we always want to give the last word to our World War II veteran, Russell Freeberg. Russell, thank you. Anything you'd like to close with for us?
Russell, I was going to unmute you. Sorry, Russell, we couldn't hear you. If you'd unmute.
I don't think he's not seeing the unmute.
He might not hear us.
Yeah. Sorry, Russell. But anyway, Russell,
So sorry.
Always a great pleasure to have you on. Thank you for being part of our community. Good night, everybody. We'll see you. Everybody have a happy Thanksgiving.